Hey, it's Sonia, and welcome to the Marta podcast. So you want to learn what the 5 advices from trial lawyer Micha Starr-Liberty are. In today's episode, along with Micha, we're going to break down these top 5 things from her experience as a trial lawyer that you can do to be more aware and to be more present. Number 1, trust your instinct. And this is from the top 3 things that she said if she could talk directly with you, the person listening. The importance of trusting your gut, because it's often usually the best outcome and the best way out. Number 2, never stop learning. Learning is a continuous curve and you must never stop doing it. Curiosity is one of the most voted for qualities of a successful leader. And so never stopping your journey and learning and always being curious as to how things work or why something the way it is can assure that you have a better, more broad understanding of the world that's going on and surrounding you right now. Number 3, using your voice, speaking up in those moments that are challenging, that you feel like it's better to stay quiet. It's easier, it's the best, quickest option for you. But you know deep inside that this isn't something that's right, that you need to make your voice heard. And so using your voice to perhaps step into someone that's being segregated or someone that's being bullied in any work or school environment. And then here's 2 things that if she could challenge today's society, she would urge them to do. Number 4 is building and giving back to that community. Whenever you're traveling, as she mentioned, if you love traveling, if you're someone that always does so for leisure in new countries, giving back to the community, picking up service, whether it is visiting and giving funds to a shelter, because a lot of these facilities and centers lack the requirements, the daily objects that we use and take for granted, some of us, like a toothbrush or a toothpaste. And number 5, the concept of consent, whether it's in terms of relationships, friendly or romantic, whether it's about your family or colleagues in a school environment, really thinking about if you've got someone's word for an okay, or say, is what I'm doing currently upsetting the partner or the other person in question. Okay, and now let's find out what Micha Starr-Liberty's been doing for the past decades. Micha Starr-Liberty is a nationally recognized trial attorney, trauma-informed advocate, and business leader who has dedicated her life to pursuing justice for survivors of assault, harassment, and human trafficking. As the founder of Liberty Law, she fearlessly litigates high-profile cases, holding major corporations accountable, including her recent groundbreaking lawsuit against Apple for its role in online exploitation. But Micha's mission extends far beyond the courtroom. She's a Cornell-Trained DEI consultant and corporate trainer, helping businesses build trauma-informed leadership and healthier workplace cultures. She also runs a victim advocacy consulting firm and leads a socially responsible coffee company that donates 15% of its profits to uplift women in the coffee industry. Her debut book, Evolutionista, The Revolutionary Act of Accountability and Advocacy After Abuse, is a powerful guide that empowers both survivors and professionals with trauma-informed legal tools and strategies. As a sought-after speaker and media voice, Micha is shaping the national dialogue on justice, accountability, and corporate responsibility. Micha Starr-Liberty, welcome on the Marta podcast. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation over the next hour or so.
I completely agree. Okay, so let me start with the fact that you're a recognized attorney, activist, entrepreneur, and now even a published author. So if I could start with you talking directly with the person listening, and from all the background you've had as a trial attorney, if you could say 3 takeaways to the listener from all that's taught you, what would they be?
First, I would say trust your instincts in any situation. 2, never stop learning about yourself and the issues that are important to you. And 3, use your voice. Use your voice in every way, shape, and form you can to help others in your community and around the planet.
I love those 3. They're right on point. Actually, I'm just reading now a book at school for our poetry literature course. and it's And Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. Okay, you're nodding your head, so I think that means that you're familiar with her. And she's got all these poems about defiance and, changing the social norms. And what I'm trying to guide you in here is your book, Evolutionista, which is a powerful call to action, especially for young people. So my question for you now is, for those that feel overwhelmed by the weight of the world, how can they start showing up as allies and advocates, even in those small ways?
Yeah, it's a challenging time, and I think that there are many of us that feel hopeless and helpless on a daily basis. And I think that what we can do is figure out how we can help, how we can take action, how we can, even if it's just, as you said, being an ally or supporting a community. It might not be our community, but any community, any culture, any segment of any society that's being pushed down or taken advantage of or surviving under political regimes that are not created for the embetterment and the uplifting of everyone in that society. Figure out whether it's a small thing or a big thing, what you can do. I will tell you, I have never had a bad experience volunteering for something or raising my hand to support a cause. I think that when we do that kind of advocacy and support, we get so much more out of it than the people that we're helping. I mean, it is just something that will uplift your spirit in a way that I think very few other experiences can.
And I think giving back to the community, showing up and trying to help in some way, shape, or form can actually not only work for the other person and help the people rise, because truly at the end of the day, you rise yourself by helping others, lifting others up, but also it can help, I suppose, in some way also lift you up, your morale, and make your day, because you're doing a good thing and you're trying to help your community reach a better conclusion or reach a better way or path to the solution. And many of our listeners now are students, high school students, or even young people learning in the workforce. So I really want to know, from your experience, what should they know about identifying and addressing those toxic environments life presents us with, whether that's in school or in internships or even early jobs?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those situations where I have to just say, trust your instinct. The mind-body connection is so powerful, and our brains are so powerful. If you are getting, what some people would call a vibe, trust it, figure it out, And it's okay to push back on your own assumptions. Like, the brain is a magnificent, incredible machine. And it's also a clunker in some ways too. So, push back. Is this real? Is this true? Is this just a trauma response I'm having based on a prior experience? But I think that, we know there's an expression that says even a dog knows when it's being kicked on purpose, right? Like, we know when we're being oppressed. We know when we're being gaslit or abused. But just like, people use the term trauma informed all the time, but not everything is being trauma informed, right? So figure out, are you really being trauma informed, or are you just annihilating your own boundaries, for example? So is it really a toxic environment, or is it just a job you'd rather not do? Valid, analyses, but always check in with yourself, because your body really will tell you whether the environment feels good for you. If you're having stress dreams, if you're having that fight with your boss in your head in the shower in the morning when you're getting ready for work, great red flags for you to pay attention to.
And you've mentioned the mind-body connection there, and you've made a link to something that I've looked at while I was researching you on your website, actually. And you had this 3-part training in English and Spanish, and you were talking about the mind effects on trauma. And you've mentioned the hippocampus in that video, and I think the prefrontal cortex as well, and the amygdala. Could you talk to me a little about the importance of staying aware?
Absolutely. So what happens when there's a trauma response to something you're seeing, something you're experiencing, whatever it is? The brain is so wonderful and it's going to try and keep you alive. That's what the brain is going to do. If a big, Tyrannosaurus Rex comes up, your brain is going to say, okay, human, how do we get out of this life? The first thing it does is it shuts down the prefrontal cortex. That's your executive functioning. That's your ability to write memories in a logical, coherent way, but it controls your processing, the way you process your thoughts. It controls your ability to respond physically, and it's your analytical brain. And the reason why the brain's trying to save your life is that if you had to sit in your analytical brain, your executive functioning, to try and figure out, is it time to run from the tiger's already there, right? So it shuts down immediately. And then there's this wash of cortisol and norepinephrine over the hippocampus. And what's so interesting to me is that trauma response, your entire left hemisphere of your brain shuts down, goes offline, cannot find your internet connection. And so what you're getting are kind of the more emotional sensory memories that are being written. So smells or touch or things that you're hearing. So in my line of work, I hear a lot of survivors say, I don't remember what time it was, but I remember the smell of a cigar or the feel of the carpet or the color of the wallpaper. Those kinds of memories are the only ones that are sticking in trauma, because you're not trying to work things out. It's just recording sensory memories. And then what happens is the amygdala, this tiny little spot. This is your dinosaur brain. This is, what has not really evolved much over the centuries. And that is going to get you into the quote unquote fight or flight, which I have a whole tangent I could go off on about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, but I will not. I'll save you from that. But the amygdala is like reptile. How do I survive? How do I get away? What do I do? It's really the whole process that the brain goes through in nanoseconds when you're triggered in a traumatic event.
Wow. I have to tell you, Micha, that I actually really am passionate about the brain and how it works. And just listening to you talk to me about what happens when, let's say, a big T-Rex shows up in front of you. I mean, I've always heard about the fight or flight, effect, but I've never really heard what happens inside our brain in a couple of milliseconds. And to see how all of your left hemisphere just blocks away and, the amygdala just comes into action. And I mean, it shows me the scientific way of explanation of what I've been feeling. And I think it also comes in, especially when actually T-Rexes are not there, but in many different ways. And I think this can also be triggered by stress, if I'm right.
Absolutely.
You talk about the trauma-informed leadership in your corporate training. I'm really curious in finding out what you mean by that, and if future leaders, like students, listening right now, or executives just starting out their career watching this on YouTube, should start learning about it now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that at this point in where we are on the planet, everyone, after living through a global pandemic, has experienced some form of trauma. It may not be causing flashbacks. It may not be causing, all kinds of impacts that we see, but we can all understand it and relate to it, right? So, and to be trauma informed, one of the things that you need to be able to do is meet people where they are and be open enough to figuring out who they are and what will trigger them. And that's what trauma-informed leadership is. So when you look at the different pillars of being trauma-informed, The last one, there are debates about whether there are 5 pillars or 6 pillars. Who cares? The last one that should always be in is people who come from oppressed backgrounds, people who have a history of being discriminated against. All of those aggressions, all of those experiences create trauma. And what we know about trauma is that it's not one of those things where, oh, I was traumatized over here and then clean slate. No, it's compound. And what's so important for leaders to understand is that organizations themselves can become traumatized. So not just the people, not just the team, the actual organization. And that looks like high turnover, gossip, fighting, absenteeism, all of the things that make a work environment toxic. It is literally toxic because there's so much trauma going on and no one's paying attention and no one's trying to figure out how to relate to each other in a trauma-informed way. The other thing is, just like we know diverse teams do better, teams that are not in constant trauma responses do better. They make more money. They're more productive. They're, more successful in whatever their task is because they're not constantly in fight or flight all day.
So I just want to make sure that I got that right, because it was really fascinating to hear that actually organizations, not just people or teams, but the actual organization can have this negative response. I mean, it really blew my mind, and I've never thought of it at such a high scale before. I've only looked at it, let's say, surface level from, an individual that can spread it to the department. But now what you're saying is it actually goes way beyond, and that's just fascinating. And I want to make a guide you actually here to the legal system, which can be confusing and intimidating, especially for survivors. So in your book, Evolutionista, you break it down. What are some ways in which justice can make it more accessible and less traumatic for those that need it?
And it's not an easy answer. And I think I will take my last breath on this planet fighting for a more trauma-informed judicial process. So there are a few safeguards, but this is where advocacy comes in. This is where we who go into court need to be advocating for the rights of our clients, not just to seek justice, but it's kind of like the Hippocratic Oath with doctors, do no harm as they're going through the process. I will tell you, young children testifying in court can be very traumatizing. And I've tried to fight and advocate for clients, maybe can we put them in another room and have them appear by video? Back in the day when I started practicing 25 years ago, that was not a thing really, but now it's very easy. But judges are entrenched, and they've been on a lot of times they've been on the bench for a long time, and their response is not to be trauma informed. It's to uphold their constitutional duties. And, I've had judges say to me, it's a traumatic event. That's just what it is, Miss Liberty. And we're not going to do X, Y, or Z because this defendant, this criminal defendant, has the right to face his or her accuser. So, it is a mission of mine to do what I can to help get trauma-informed training into our courts. Because the idea that it's just a tough system is not acceptable. It's just not acceptable when we're talking about, especially minors, children who, anyone who's gone through a traumatic event, who's a victim of crime, sexual assault, or especially people who've been trafficked. There is a lot of fear, and we want to do what we can. It's never going to be a touchy-feely system, but we want to do what we can to help people come forward and tell the truth and to get accountability in whatever way it looks like for them.
And you also advocate with strategy and public policy and messaging. So my question is now about your Radiant Star Roasters, which is your coffee company, which supports women in the industry. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate you brewing a future, let's say, with women in the industry and help make them feel more uplifted, empowered, and equipped to get the right tools to succeed. My question for you now, Micha, is why did you start to combine advocacy with entrepreneurship? And what advice would you give to young people that want to build purpose-driven business?
So the coffee idea came to me, when you work with trauma survivors, you got to figure out ways that make yourself feel better and whole, and you've got to figure out what your self-care looks like. And for me, for better or worse, at 3 a.m. when I'm stressed out about something, or a client has just been taken to the hospital, or, whatever trigger event is happening, I think, what can I do to help people in, this community, or women, or anyone who's from a community that needs a little help? What can I do to help? And I go on LegalZoom, or I send my business lawyer an email saying, let's start a company. The worst is LegalZoom because I can do it all by myself and there's no one there to stop me. So I just go and start companies. Helps me process. But, I kind of grew up thinking about what communities that women are shunned from, or ostracized from, or not allowed into. And coffee is one of those that has a lot of trafficking. There's a lot of wage abuse, labor violations. A lot of the countries that are known for growing coffee have rules, regulations, laws that don't necessarily let the women inherit the land, or even if the woman is able to inherit the land, for example, she can't sell the property without her husband's permission. There's a lot of regressive and oppressive laws that can stifle that entrepreneurial spirit that a lot of women have. I think that's nonsense, and that we need to do what we can.
Mm-hmm.
We are using the labor of these women. We're using the resources of these women, and they're not being paid a fair wage. And there's tons of sexual violence and trafficking, both labor and sex, and we just can't tolerate it. So my small way to give back was to work with women-owned farms and plantations, and then to give away a percentage of our profits to organizations that support women in coffee globally. And they're out there, and there are women who've been fighting this fight long before I thought I had, a new and unique idea. And it's a wonderful community. And one of the things that there's an organization called Women in Coffee International. And one of the things that they do is write and do trainings in microfinancing, helped by getting one of the books translated from English to Portuguese, which is spoken in several coffee growing companies. But any little way you can give back. Coffee is such a big part of my life, and always has been, for someone who, works crazy hours. And it was also a way for the women in my family to kind of build community. I remember being a little girl sitting around the kitchen table with my grandmother and my aunties and my mom. They were all drinking coffee, and eventually I would drink coffee too. But it was, and we would sit and laugh and tell stories, and it really is a vessel for community, for women and for other people.
Mm-hmm. I have a question now that is really unrelated, but I've noticed before we started the recording you were drinking coffee. Is it actually here branded?
There it is.
I mean, I have to say that I also love coffee, and to hear actually the truth about it. And because now, especially in our days with technology making up so much of our daily lives, this information can really step into the game and really take us away from the true story, or at least show us or give us only a concealed part of the story. And I think I really love the idea that you do and you engage in, that you must give back to others and help in any way possible. And that also, I mean, in some ways, taking you back to when you were small and coffee was an activity that connected with you, with your mom and your grandma. I think giving back to others can also give back to the community. And really, I mean, I think one small act of kindness or giving back maybe helping out that one charity with a small fund that you have and manage to give can make someone's life more than you can imagine. I mean, there's this famous quote that goes, what's ordinary for you with someone else is awesome. And that can just go.
Exactly. And it does something for your spirit, to give back. It really is a dopamine producing, endorphin producing experience. And so, I always talk to my clients or people in my community and ask them, especially if we're having a difficult conversation, what are you doing for self-care today? And I always say, add to cart is an okay thing, but, think about giving of yourself rather than, buying something from unless it's coffee on Radiant Star Roasters, then add to cart. Just kidding.
That's allowed. That's accepted.
But we tend to get stuck in this is the thing that makes me feel better, or this is the thing that I do to give back or whatever. But sit in that analysis for a while and figure out what's going to make me feel better. I always recommend to people travel is a wonderful cure for all kinds of ailments. And one of the things that I do every time I travel, if I can, especially if I'm traveling for pleasure, is I build in a day of service. So I will look for trafficking centers or, children's hospitals or whatever, where I can go buy a bunch of supplies, for example, and just drop them off, because we don't think about what a rape crisis center needs, but it's things like toothpaste and toothbrushes and hair ties and pajamas and all of this stuff, that is so meaningful and so necessary. And a lot of times, I remember going to Mexico about a year ago, and not every girl at a shelter had their own hairbrush. I was like, that's unacceptable, whatever. And it may seem so small, but, if you're lucky enough to be able to travel and, enjoy another culture, give back to it, give back to that culture and those who are the most in need.
And I think this ties on really nicely with your experience speaking about the importance of reality-based optimism in trauma recovery. Can you explain what it is and how young people can apply it into their own personal struggles?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that is hard for folks, whether they have a therapist or, are just kind of starting that journey about where to turn to get help, is there's an expectation that it's going to be an easy fix. I just need to I just need to go to talk therapy for a couple of sessions and get this off my chest and I'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, what it's really like and the hard work that it takes. And I think optimism and, spiritual connection and whatever it is that kind of fuels you is wonderful. But we also have to be realistic. Just the optimism that this is going to be quick for me will and does lead to feeling like you're doing it right, or you're broken and everybody else is able to get through this experience, and why am I suffering in a way? Your experience is your experience. And so be optimistic, plan for the best, give yourself experiences where you can connect to that. And, little wins are important. They're very important. So take the win, even if you feel like, well, it's not enough, or we put so much pressure on ourselves. I should be feeling better by now. They say that this therapy should have worked or whatever, whatever it is, the oppression we put ourselves through by negative self-talk is dangerous and difficult. Just like ignoring reality can be dangerous and not lead to a result that's healthy and sustainable. So figure out little steps. It's a journey. And so you want to make sure you've got people around you that support that journey. But we all have those friends who will just gas you up all day and tell you everything's perfect and you're the best. And I love that. Of course, we all do. But the reality is there is some hard work. that goes into this, and you've got to be dedicated and take the steps and use the tools that you have at your discretion and availability, and really dig into that and look for different ways. If one modality isn't working for you, leave it and find one that does.
And I think in that sense, it's never an easy fix, especially since a lot of people at school do go to therapy and expect to leave from that session saying, I'm done, I'm healed, or I've gone over this setback. But it's a process, like you said. It's something that takes time, especially if in some circumstances you're exposed to unpleasant situations that can push you back and make you feel like you're not making any actual process. And so I think it's just useful to reflect back and to see actually, those little steps, little successes that you've made and that you're actually progressing, because it's not always going to be 100% linear. And it's just thoughtful and easy to remember that actually, even if you're not going as at the rate that you want to go to succeed, it can be very good to just reflect and, get on that track and see actually how far you're going. And your work emphasizes this community healing and the importance of safe spaces. So I've got an interesting question for you now, Micha, and that is, if you could challenge today's generation to do just one thing differently in order to build a safer and more compassionate world, what would it be?
It would be to really think about the concept of consent in all areas of life and work and relationship. The thing that concerns me the most these days is the kind of abuse and bullying that we see online. And, in my generation, we say things like, thank God the internet wasn't invented when we were in high school, because everything is just out there. But I am seeing so many instances of sharing images that are intimate, that there's no consent for, that sharing information about intimate details is out there. What can happen and does happen is then extortion and self-harm, and there's just a myriad of things that are not healthy and not an exercise of good boundaries. And it's, if there's more conversation about what permission people have to share personal information, I think we might be able to get through where we are right now in a more healthy way. So, rather than pop off on TikTok about so-and-so, or, what I see here a lot in the United States is official Instagram accounts for high schools, and then the anonymous unofficial Instagram account where a lot of information is shared. A lot of reports of CSA and SA are made on these kinds of accounts and on various social media platforms. And there is a lot of damage that can be done. And so my one ask for everyone in the younger generations who are growing up with social media is to really think about how, treat people how you want to be treated, figure out what your own boundaries are, and respect the boundaries of other people, because the psychological damage done to sharing what we call child sexual abuse material and anything like that, intimate pictures, and it's widespread. When I do talks on this to parents, they're floored at the numbers, because everybody thinks, well, not my kids and not my kids' friends, and they don't, and it's like everybody is doing this. So just think about the impact, and do what you can to learn how to respect other people's boundaries.
Do you think this let's say movement or phenomenon has a positive outcome, or stepping into the future, especially now with AI being incorporated into everything? Do you see things positively or slightly more negative in terms of progressing forward?
I'm very concerned. Yeah, it's really hard, and it's hard to do advocacy in this space, because of the platforms, the incredible wealth that they have and, not wanting to be regulated. And so we're really just kind of going to have to count on people doing the right thing, and checking in on each other. I mean, this is when everyone should be starting to build community and making sure people who, it happens that the sextortion or extortion online happens very quickly. The predators can go through a cycle. For some reason with younger males, it's quicker than it is for females, but within a couple hours. And because there is a concern of the young males that information, images, whatever is going to be exposed, we're seeing a lot of self-harm and attempts to self-harm. And so, I just want everyone to proceed with caution. And if someone asks you to send them a picture, just don't do it. That's my advice.
Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting stepping forward, seeing this new wave of young role models and seeing where they go and how they shift in terms of being impacted by this daily recurrence that is happening a lot more than we think it is. So I really hope the advocacy and awareness is going to grow and that more people are going to find out that actually this is a very important and urgent matter that needs to be addressed. And now stepping forward into, let's say, the literature world and how that can influence us. Behind me, I have got a full bookshelf of books, and I'm really curious, Micha, if you can tell me your top 2 books that, let's say, transformed your life or completely changed your perspective of which you view it in today.
Yeah, so the 2 books would be The Body Keeps Score, written by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And it really is one of the first kind of seminal books about the impact of trauma on your body and brain. And it helps people understand what their bodies and brains are going through, as they write these trauma memories and as they try and work through the trauma. I think that, the terminology that we've been given falls short. The fight, flight, freeze, or fawn is not accurate. And so what I have seen is a lot of survivors, a lot of victims of crime kind of beat themselves up and self-blame. I couldn't even do that right. The fight or flight especially. And I just want to let people know that phenomenon or those responses are credited to a physiologist around the turn of 2 centuries ago named William Cannon, who actually never wrote about that, who never said it. And also, we're not talking about the physiological response, and he was not a neurologist or neurobiologist, he didn't study the brain or whatever. We're talking about the brain's defense circuitry. So even if this doctor had said those things, which he didn't, they're not about the brain, they're about the body. Mm-hmm. And so survivors of sexual violence have been blaming themselves forever. Well, I didn't fight. I didn't, freeze. I disassociated, or I did this other thing, or they didn't understand it. And there's also reactions like tonic mobility, tonic immobility, where, you can collapse. That's a trauma response. And people think, oh my God, I just passed out or I disassociate. They don't even understand what's happening. And it provides, in my experience, trauma survivors so much relief to know finally why they did or didn't do the things that they did in that traumatic event instead of blaming themselves. So I think it's a very important book. The other book is called Homo Sapiens, and it's written by Yuval Harari. And it's basically like this narrative of the history of Homo sapiens broken down into different revolutionary periods. But, again, my whole quest is for us all to figure out what makes us tick, why we do what we do, and how we can get through it in a way without self-blame or, self-harm. Like, this is just who we are as a species. And so I think, learning more about why we do what we do and what decisions we made and why certain species survived and others didn't. I just think it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I should add evolutionista to the list, though. I'm such a terrible self-promoter.
Go ahead. That third one on here, evolutionista.
So I wrote evolutionista as my best attempt, like, to have the book be the conversation with your legal bestie who will help you get through this process, and just to provide context and information. I really think every struggle that we go through gets better with information and learning about what's actually going on. And in litigation, front loading what that actually looks like for a client so they know what they're getting themselves into, and giving them a little mini law school course so they can understand all of it. I just think information is power. It's a real trigger if something is not predictable, if it's an unstable environment or, bouncing all over the place. And litigation has its ups and its downs and is unpredictable in a lot of instances. But if you can explain to your client where that's going to come in and how it's going to feel, they're so much better off as they go through the process.
3 books. So that's The Body Keeps Score, Homo Sapiens, which I'm very accustomed to here. It's a global bestseller, and I've never really been drawn to reading it because I actually thought it was a lot more history and factual, heavy on terminology. But actually now you've piqued my interest, and I'm actually really looking forward to get my hands on both of these and find out, even, in the Body Keeps Score, why I've been feeling the way I have, because I think trauma can be manifested here in a lot of many different ways, which are more subtle, especially for the younger audience that hasn't lived through a lot in terms of education, that is still could be potentially misinformed, and can provide, as you said, that sense of relief to finally know why you're acting the way you have, or why you've been experiencing something that you didn't know why made you do that. Mm-hmm. And read Evolutionista because I think it really grasps all your knowledge and all your experience that you wished you read at the start of your career.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really accurate. Like, for example, one of the trauma responses that I didn't know was a trauma response, and I didn't know what was happening, was hypersensitivity to noise and light. I just thought I, was cranky in loud rooms, but it was actually a trauma response.
Wow. Okay.
So just understanding why we do the things that we do, what our triggers are. I mean, that's an exercise that I always go through in my leadership trainings, is having people do this survey, which breaks down kind of your best self and your shadow self. And the shadow self comes out when you're triggered. So figuring out in a work environment why you're triggered helps you build a really good team, helps your people on your team understand you and why, reacting the way you're going to react. I mean, I'm not saying everyone is going to sing Kumbaya all the time and tiptoe around everyone else, but if you could learn something about your team to not trigger them, you should do it. It's just common sense. You're going to get more productivity too.
And this leadership course really draws you into a different direction because it's part of your Lion-Hearted Leader firm, and you've also got this leadership consulting that since a lot of my podcasts have been on leadership itself, is really interesting to me. And the goal is really to cultivate diverse, equitable, and inclusive workspaces. And this guides me on to a YouTube video that I've watched before recording here with you today, Micha, which is about a lecture or a seminar, giving a speech. A couple of lawyers have actually been taking business courses and what those business courses have taught them. I really enjoyed it because I've never thought that lawyers, getting all that professional knowledge can go ahead then and use that business as, experience. So my question for you now is, as we reach the end of our discussion, I really am curious to see if you've got one idea or one habit or advice that you would like to leave the guests with.
I think the most important concept that we can carry with ourselves all day, every day is remember who you really are. And the other is, and I love that I'm seeing a book behind you that says, let them.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much competition in work environments and people, cliques and all of that. And I'm involved in a lot of organizations and you always see that. And one of the things that people ask me about when they need mentoring is so-and-so said this about me, my boss is doing this or whatever the gripes are. I just say, let them. You know who you are. Remember who you are. Don't live their life. Live your life. What's your path? What's your passion? And if people are going to talk junk, let them. They're just jealous. So let people be jealous and remember who you are. Those are the two pieces. Every single day, all day.
I love that. I love that ending. It made me feel so good. And I just wanted to thank you for bringing my attention onto stuff about coffee that I've never thought about, or the teams and people actually being upscaled to an organization experiencing negative effects, because it's so easy to go about my daily life not considering actually those big ideas and really think about it on a more deep level rather than just, at surface. So thank you so much, Micha, for being on the Smarter podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation, and keep up the good work, my dear.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
You too.
I've really hoped you've enjoyed today's conversation with me and Micha to today's alarming topics that really deserve more attention and that are actually more present in life than some of us may think they are. And just to make sure, if you didn't quite catch the 3 books that Micha mentioned during our discussion that said completely transformed her life, they're number 1, The Body Keeps Score. Then number 2, Homo Sapiens. Number 3, Evolutionista. And all of them are linked down below if you want to grab a hold of them and change your life potentially forever as well. Now for the remaining week ahead, I want to leave you with the idea of treating people the way you want to be treated. Remember that if you want to say a hateful comment that can potentially really harm someone and cause a ripple of effects later on throughout their life, just think before you say something to fit in with a group or get attention in a lively circle of people to make your voice heard. Just remember that if you don't want to be treated that way, it's best to just keep silent. And now, if nobody told you this before, I just want to say that I really believe that you have the potential to create the life of your dreams. I cannot wait to see what you've been up to this week, and see you next one.